This week for my column Homefront, where we bring you stories about members of the military and their families as we try to bridge the divide between civilians and the military, I introduce you to two recent Naval Academy graduates and their podcast, which is called Thank You for Your Service. This features some really candid interviews from some of the most prominent retired U.S. military officials, as well as experts, scholars, and politicians, including, as you can see right there, retired General Stanley McChrystal, who is in this week's episode. Right now we have Thomas Krasnation and Nick Pareso joining me now. They are behind this podcast. They're coming to us from Chicago, where they are in a master's program at the University of Chicago before they report respectively to a submarine and a destroyer. So talking to both of you for this column, it's clear that you're both very careful in this podcast to make clear you are not speaking for the Navy, but you're also about to embark on your military careers, and you clearly have concerns that the military is walled off from the rest of society. Thomas, tell me why this is something that has been so concerning to you that you decided to put a podcast together on it.
Right, yeah, I mean, we're at a policy school right now. We're at the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. And so we view this really as a public policy issue. That's the lens that we're coming at this through. And when there is this divide, as you have written about and as so many other people have written about, between the military and society, and when people aren't engaged and invested in what their military is doing, maybe because they don't know anybody in the military, maybe because they don't know anything about the military, we view that as a first-order policy problem for the military, because it means that the military and what it does is not being taken into account when people hold their elected officials accountable.
And one of the points that you guys make in this, and that you give voice to people who have this concern, is that when people aren't familiar with the military, and even their elected officials, Nick, are not familiar with the military, there isn't as much oversight of the military. I think some people might be surprised to hear, coming from a military perspective, that you're sort of inviting that challenge in a way. But why do you think that's important?
I think it's important because the military is an institution just like the courts are an institution, or Congress is, or the police are. And people are invested and engaged in what those institutions are doing. So if people are engaging, with what the courts are doing and what Congress is doing, what the police are doing, they should be equally invested in what the military is doing as well.
Have you guys been surprised by just how high-profile the guests are that want to be on your podcast? What is that telling you about their desire to have this conversation?
Yes, yeah, we have been blown away by that, and it tells us that there are lots of people. We are not experts at this. There are a lot of people who are experts at this, who have been studying this and practicing it for decades, and all of them know how important of an issue this is. And so we've been very, very surprised by the enthusiasm.
But I think it speaks volumes to the fact that they really want people to know more about civil-military relations, seeing how willing they are to do these interviews with us.
Yeah, certainly. And so you guys promise, it's called Thank You for Your Service, and then the subtitle is a hard look at civil-military affairs. And to that point, and this is key this week, as we've heard testimony from Senator Martha McSally, who's talked about being raped when she was in the Air Force. You taped an episode with former Senator Claire McCaskill, and you talk at length with her about sex assault in the military. Why did you feel that it was so important to have this as part of your podcast?
We talked with Senator McCaskill about her work on the Senate Armed Services Committee regarding sexual assault reform, reforming the way that the sexual assault cases are handled in the military. And we know that there's a lot of interest in that, and we are glad that there's a lot of interest in that from the public, because it is such an important issue. And the reason we wanted to look at it in our podcast is because a lot of the time the discussions are motivated by how people feel about the topic, and we really want the discussion to also be motivated by evidence and rigorous analysis, like our school at the University of Chicago teaches.
Yeah. Hey, you guys, thank you so much for coming on. Thomas and Nick, we really appreciate you joining us today. And you can read more about their story and their podcast in my column, Homefront, which is cnn.com/Homefront. And you can send your feedback and story ideas to homefront@cnn.com. Coming up,